Most of us have heard the parables of the 10 virgins and the talents 100 times. And we usually think of them as these nice, simple moral lessons, right? Be prepared, use your gifts, that kind of thing. But what if they're not just general advice? What if they're actually a very specific prophetic warning? A hidden message for a world that was about to change forever. It's a weird combination when you think about it. Bridesmaids waiting around for a wedding, and some bankers or servants managing their boss's money. But here's the thing. Jesus wasn't just telling random stories. He was using these very specific images to answer a massive, world-altering question that his disciples had just hit him with.
And this is where it all starts to click. See, to really understand these parables, we can't just jump into the stories themselves. We have to rewind a couple of verses and look at the exact question that kicked this whole thing off.
To get Jesus's answer, you have to get their question. When the disciples ask about these things, they're pointing right at the giant temple in Jerusalem, which Jesus had just said was going to be torn down to the last stone. For them, that single catastrophic event was directly tied to his return and the end of everything. That question sets the stage for everything he says next.
And this is the crucial part. When Jesus starts talking about bridesmaids and bankers, he's not changing the subject. Not at all. He is still directly answering their question about the destruction of the temple. These parables are the answer, but they're coded in symbols his audience would have understood in a heartbeat.
All right, so let's start decoding. Our first stop is that parable of the 10 virgins. To really get what's going on with the bridesmaids and their lamps, we have to look at them through an Old Testament lens. Okay, here is the first major clue. Throughout the Old Testament, God often talks about his relationship with his people Israel like a marriage. In the book of Jeremiah, for instance, God literally calls himself their husband. So for the disciples, hearing a story about a wedding feast would immediately make them think of the covenant between God and his people.
Now, what about the lamps? Well, this isn't just any old lamp. Right in the heart of the temple stood the menorah, this huge golden lampstand. And it wasn't just there for decoration. Its flame, which was supposed to burn forever, was a powerful symbol of the actual presence of God living among his people.
And get this, keeping that flame lit was a sacred priestly duty. As this verse from Exodus lays out, the priests were commanded to constantly keep the menorah filled with pure olive oil to make sure that light, God's presence, never ever went out. It was basically their most important job. So when Jesus tells a story about foolish virgins whose lamps go out because they didn't bring enough oil, his disciples would have heard a bombshell. This wasn't just a story about being forgetful. It was a direct hit, a parable about a corrupt priesthood that had failed, completely failed in its sacred duty to tend the flame of God's presence. Now let's jump to the next parable and see how this all connects. Right after the story of the virgins, Jesus tells the parable of the talents. It seems really different on the surface, but it's actually hitting the exact same target, the temple.
First off, we've got to understand the stakes here. A talent wasn't just a coin. It was a huge amount of money. I mean, think about it. Over 20 years of wages for an average worker. We are talking about a fortune. So when this master hands over this kind of cash to his servants, he's giving them an incredible amount of resources and a huge responsibility.
The parable says the wicked servant hid his master's money. So what was all this money supposed to be for anyway? What would the people listening have thought? Well, once again, the Old Testament gives us the key.
Look at this. It's a parallel from the book of 2 Kings. Generations before Jesus, a good king named Josiah collected a bunch of money and gave it to workers for one very specific job: to repair God's temple. The parallels are pretty amazing, right? A master gives money to workers to invest in his house. Sound familiar? But, and this is a huge but, Jesus adds a critical twist to the story. In King Josiah's time, the Bible says no accounting was needed because the workers were completely trustworthy. Jesus flips that script. In his story, the master comes back and demands a strict accounting. And the servant who did nothing with the master's money, the one who failed to invest in the master's house, is thrown out. Okay, so let's put the pieces together. We have a failed priesthood that let the flame of God's presence go out. And we have failed servants who didn't invest in rebuilding God's house. So what is Jesus actually telling his disciples? Well, this is where both parables snap together with this powerful message about what's coming next. This is the core idea right here.
Jesus had just told them that the physical temple was going to be completely wiped out. So why on earth would he tell parables about priestly duties in temple building? Because he wasn't talking about fixing up the old temple. He was giving them the blueprint for a completely new one that was going to rise from the ashes of the old. And the amazing thing is, they got it. Years down the road, the Apostle Paul writes to the church in Ephesus, and look at the language he uses. He tells them that they are the new household of God, a new holy temple being built on the foundation of the apostles themselves.
And it wasn't just Paul. The Apostle Peter says the exact same thing. He tells believers they are living stones being built into a spiritual house. But then he goes even further. He says they are also the new holy priesthood. Do you see what he's saying? They are both the building and the builders. They are the priests and the temple, all at once. So you see, these aren't just ancient stories about some building that was destroyed 2,000 years ago. They carried this radical lesson that moves the whole focus from a physical place to a living, breathing community of people.
This really sums up the entire shift he was talking about. Step 1, the old priesthood failed to keep God's presence. The lamps went out. Step 2, the old leadership failed to invest in God's house. The money was just buried. And all of that led to step 3, Jesus commissioning his followers to become the new temple and the new priests, with a job of tending that flame and building that spiritual house all across the world.
And that brings this ancient prophetic warning right to our doorstep. The message of these parables is that the temple of God is no longer a place you go to. It's a people you're a part of. So the final question it leaves us with is a really personal one. Are you a living stone, faithfully tending the flame and investing in the growth of this living temple?